My name is Jessica Green, and hey, everybody. Hello, my name is Jessica Green, and I am the artistic director of the Houston Cinema Arts Society. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. And we hope everybody's doing okay under these circumstances. So we have an incredible program tonight. We're so excited to be presenting this program, Memory Strata, which includes the work of Sky Hopinka and Simon Liu. And this program is co-presented with PSA out of Dallas, and it's programmed by Michael Sicinski. So we have an amazing lineup. Just real quick, if anybody out there, watching this Q&A is not familiar with the Houston Cinema Arts Society, our website is cinemahtx.org, cinemahtx.org. And we're doing a lot of programming, and we start a week-long virtual run of the Infiltrators on Friday, and then we have a Q&A on Wednesday, and we also have the Houston Cinema Arts Festival, which will be November 12th to 16th. So we're going to share more about the organization at the end of the program. We want to get this going. We have these amazing filmmakers. We have this amazing partner. So I am going to go ahead and throw this to PSA out of Dallas, our incredible partner on this program, so they can share more about PSA and the program. And thanks so much, everybody, for joining us tonight. We're so happy you're with us. So on to you, PSA.
Working. Okay, yes, it is. Hi, my name is Tony Wen, and
do you want me to start, Tony, or do you want to go?
Sure, sorry. You can go.
Hi, I'm Daniel Lobbs, and I'm here with Tony Wen, and we're the curators behind PSA, Pleasure.Style.Attitude.
PSA is a film series through which we are trying to cultivate discussions regarding race, aesthetics, queerness, and the like. We try to cultivate discussions regarding multiplicity and heterogeneity, and we just do it over time. Generally at the Texas Theater, but we transition to a virtual screening format.
And as stated by Jessica, we're thrilled to be collaborating on this program with Houston Cinema Arts Society. Definitely check, if you guys haven't, those of us who are in Dallas, if you haven't checked out what they're doing, we don't have the geographic borders these days. So definitely check out what they're doing. All their programming is virtual, just like ours right now. We'd also like to thank our partners at the City of Dallas Art and Office of Art and Culture for their ongoing support, as well as our physical partner, the Texas Theater.
Yeah, so before we head off to our curator / moderator, Michael Sicinski, again, we would like to announce our next virtual program, which is next week, and we'll be doing a Directors in Focus of Derek Jarman's music videos. Our guests will be the film director and historian, Evan Purcell, and director Dom G. Jones, and we will be spending an hour just delighting, riveting of all things Jarman.
And that discussion will live stream next Wednesday, and we hope to see you then. Please go ahead, if you haven't already, follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Pleasure.Style.Attitude, or visit our website at psafilm.com for more information about this upcoming program and programming that's coming up. So without further ado, oh, we have some housekeeping stuff. If you guys want to participate in the Q&A, please go ahead and submit your questions and comments via the YouTube live comments, and we'll be handing those questions off to the moderator so that way you guys can be a part of this conversation. Without further ado, let's go ahead and bring on Michael, Sky, and Simon.
Where'd I go?
All right, you guys should all be on here.
Yeah.
I'm not seeing anything. I've lost everyone. Oh, there we go. All right. Pardon me. All right. Thank you, Jessica, Daniel, and Tony. And thank you all for logging on. This is something I've been looking forward to, hoping to try and get something together like this for quite some time. Of course, didn't count on it being online, but interesting times we live in. So I'm very happy that it's come together this way. My name is Michael Sicinski, and I have been programming avant-garde and experimental film for the Houston Cinema Art Society for several years now. And I'm just really happy that we've been able to put together this week of programming films by Sky Hopinka and Simon Liu. If I wanted to say a little bit about why I thought of putting these two filmmakers together, it kind of came to me about a year ago. That if I could really kind of describe, I think they're two of the finest filmmakers working right now in this particular experimental idiom, but I would say that they're two filmmakers whose works create what I would call ecosystems. You know, you really get a sense when you're watching their films that they are conducting a sense of space, a sense of environment, a sense of community, using superimpositions and text and image to create kind of entire environments that I think are really inviting and really kind of envelop the viewer, really invite the viewer in to a way of seeing. And so I really think that even though their films are very different, I think they're very complementary in certain ways. And hopefully in the course of this discussion, we'll talk about some of that. So quick introductions. Sky Hopinka is a Ho-Chunk Nation national and descendant of the Pechanga band of Luiseno Indians and associate professor at Simon Fraser University. And Simon Liu is a film artist who hails originally from Hong Kong, is now based in Brooklyn, and has worked in 16 millimeter, worked in installation, and we're happy to have them both with us tonight. So welcome to Simon and Sky. Let's just kick it off. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. So the first question, I just noticed you got Beaker. Sky, I just caught my eye. Okay, so, and welcome to Beaker. Me. Okay, so one thing, I was rewatching the films, of course, in kind of preparation for this. And like I said, I get the sense that you both kind of create, like I said, ecosystems. And one of the things that I really noticed, the reason that this program kind of clicked for me as far as kind of pairing the two of you was really when I saw your most recent film, Sky Lore, and then kind of saw some Simon's film shortly thereafter, that it was this idea of superimposition and layering. And I was kind of interested if maybe both of you in turn could talk a little bit about how you work with images, how you think about applying images one on top of the other or sequentially. I mean, how do you really kind of conceive of yourselves as composers in image? And of course, we'll talk about sound subsequently, but maybe we could just kind of talk about how you think about images as material objects to work with.
I'll go first.
Okay.
So I mean, I guess most of my abstract 16 millimeter films, I'm really relying on chance and really relying on kind of projecting ideas of how things will composite or come together. But I'm like very interested in gestures. I'm very interested in trying to be all like my analog works, all the superimpositions are done both in camera and then in lab, like various lab processes like contact printing, and then some like chemical manipulations as well. And so I think I'm very interested in this idea of, since I collect the 16 millimeter material in Hong Kong and or in Stoke-on-Trent, which is where my mother lives in England, I'm interested in this idea of taking kind of material like a physical capturing of something in a place that's far away, and then working with it back in the United States. And it's kind of just a way of really connecting back to like where I'm from. And also I'm interested in the idea of kind of creating a shrouded image, the idea of like almost in high view, which is one of the pieces in the program, almost creating like an overwhelming number of things to look at, so that there's not like a hierarchy in terms of what should be seen. I'm interested in like kind of and how that relates back to thought. You know, sometimes you'll be thinking about something that's important, or something that you think is important, or a family member or something, and then something can distract you and take you away from that moment. And before you know it, you're like 3 blocks down the street without even knowing where you were previously. And so I think that kind of like in between space of how like memory or how like thoughts kind of come at you in a way that's very unfluid, in a way that's very like can be overwhelming, but also fluid at the same time. That's something that I'm kind of trying to grasp at with some of my work.
Sky?
Oh, sorry, I knocked over my LaCroix.
Oh
no. Yeah. Like especially with a film like Lore, you know, I mean, it one of the impetuses for that was to think about how I work with digital video in terms of overlaying, in terms of like these different filters, how that could apply to working on 16 millimeter. It was my first time shooting 16, so I was also interested in this process of photographs that I was working through, where I was cutting up these transparencies and overlaying them and photographing them, and it felt akin to nostalgia in a certain way, like Frampton's film. That I thought was really generative in thinking about how I look at landscapes, or how I look at images, and how they can affect one another, or create new landscapes, or create new territories that are more representative of how I exist, or abstractly think of myself existing in this world. As well as just looking at these different places and locations, and also as markers of memories and who I was with, and even with like, you know, filming my friends and our little band practice, you know, it was just, it's one of those things that it's very much like for me in determining what this territory is, or how it can then be something outside of any sort of definition around a boundary or cartography or whatever it is. And so in that way, like I think images are really tied to landscape, and even just markers and symbols of who is there or who isn't there anymore.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, you've got the kind of concrete geographical space, but then the kind of psychometric space, and it's the experiential kind of affect of being somewhere, and then how that space kind of creates resonant memories that connect to other spaces. I mean, one of the things that I thought was kind of interesting revisiting all of these films is that this really happens materially given the way that both of you work with images, particularly of, say, space and landscape. I mean, looking, say, Sky, looking back at I'll Remember You As You Were, and the opening sequence with the First People's Dance, that it almost looks like heat-sensitive photography or something, but the abstraction creates this sense of ambiguous space where you can't necessarily tell immediately who's in the foreground and who's in the background. Bodies and color kind of begin to shift spaces, so it's not necessarily figure-ground relationships kind of become unstable. And then Simon, looking back at high view, the superimpositions will often create this play of surface and depth. I mean, a lot of the film you use has kind of developer film and this kind of tactile surface, but then you'll have another piece of film that has someone standing in a doorway in the back, and so this completely kind of modernistic flatness suddenly kind of pops into depth. And so I guess one thing I would kind of maybe ask along those lines is, how do you both see your formal procedures as having evolved in response or in relationship to your personal, social, political interest? I mean, is it all kind of organic, or have the two different things kind of driven each other? How do you see it all kind of related?
I think for myself, sorry.
Yeah, I realized what a gargantuan question that is after it came out of my mouth, but
it's okay. I mean, I think for Highview, for that piece, I was shooting primarily with like Fuji film stock, and they stopped making film in 2011. So I have a hookup in Pakistan who sells me like really cheap, like big rolls of Fuji film, basically. And I was doing that because like to use film that was older and cheaper, it felt like I could be like more courageous with it. I wasn't trying to be so precious with the material. So I felt like very free with like exposing the same roll of film 5 times over and over again. In a way that wasn't precise, in a way that like kind of lended itself to kind of like taking risks and things like that. And then, so in the film, kind of, there's 2 passages with my aunt, who is in her 70s now, and she grew up in, my family grew up in like a walled village. Some version of this walled village basically fought off the British during when they colonized the space. So it's a very old kind of space, you know, and she's repeatedly walking up and down this hallway that's like the entrance to the village. And it's still on the wall, it says like no outsiders. It's a really like a place that feels completely stuck in the past. No, not stuck in the past, but of the past. And so she hasn't lived, her apartment was, where she lives now is like very close to that area. And so, so her life kind of remains unchanged from that way. She's kind of like, and I feel like I'm comparing, like in the film, like the moments with her are very still, even though they're kind of shrouded with like all these different defects and things. They're still, her places are very still, whereas like footage around the city is very frantic. There's a lot of movement going on, and I feel like what I'm trying to achieve with a lot of my abstraction, with my abstract work, is trying to convey not memories themselves, or how a memory might have made you feel, a kind of a pursuit of this kind of like moment, like pursuits of moments that like where things kind of made sense for a minute, but like you're never gonna be able to get back to that place because it's non-verbal in a way. And so I was talking about the expired Fuji film stock before, and actually when I got the film processed, there was a bunch of like the black backing on the film became stuck to the emulsion. So it basically created like a pointless effect. So, and like most people, you know, when they take like film on a trip and take it back, you know, it's like, was there something wrong with the film? That's a big problem, you know, but for me, that's exciting. I want to try and like, it's not, but I don't want to like show a mistake. I want to try and like work with and exploit a mistake in a way, a certain kind of roughness that lends itself to finding like a new image out of things. I just want to say like that's what I really appreciate about Sky's work as well, is that like within the abstraction, there are like moments, like in Jagia Prox kind of, and that beautiful moment when the skies are kind of going like this. And at the end with the camera, like kind of like shakes off, you know, and like, or in When You're Lost in the Rain, like how like when you use that stabilizing effect, you know, there's a kind of like lending itself to like the unpredictability of things, and how that relates back to like the margins of being able to say something verbally in a way. I think, I mean, I was making many, like a lot of abstract films, like layered abstract films for a long time. And I feel like with kind of an urgency towards like what's been developing in Hong Kong over the past year, I've wanted to be much more direct and concrete in the images I'm showing. And I don't remember who this is, but I remember a filmmaker who made a lot of abstract works in the 70s was saying that like, I just wish I had like the image, you know, I wish I just had that image for what it was, and without it being covered, without it being shrouded. And I thought to myself, like, wouldn't it be a shame if if in the future I look back at all this stuff that I collected and wasn't able to see what was going on in a very like direct way, you know? So I feel like that desire to want to be more forthright and direct with the images that I'm showing relates back to a feeling that I need to connect directly to the space in a mental way as well, in terms of ideas.
Right.
I mean, thinking back about like formal choices and what was the question?
How your formal strategies have kind of evolved vis-a-vis your personal political interests. Like, are they all kind of driving each other, or does one thing kind of take the lead depending on the project?
I think like they're very much entwined in ways that are really hard for me to parse out in some ways, but I mean also not in other ways as well. I mean, even with that opening shot in I'll Remember As You Were, what is not as You'll Become, with the powwow and the grand entry. I mean, one thing that was like going through my head was just like the political ramifications of presenting Indigenous people on film and like that history and like the agency around who has the ability to assert their own selves within these different, I don't know, like films or genres or whatever. And so by obfuscating like the image itself or obfuscating the people that are there, like in some ways it was a gesture of trying to be protective, but also it lent itself is to be representative of just this also like this procession of life and death and with reincarnation. And so just kind of bouncing back and forth between these different choices around what am I showing, what am I not showing, and then thinking like how does that inspire something else or the next movement in the film, or to go back and rethink like an opening shot, or to go back and rethink like something that happens in the middle. Because actually I think that layer of those 3 layers on top of the powwow was abstracted. I think that was like one of the last things that I did in the film. Before it was just like the straight shot, and it never quite sat well with me for a few reasons, but it's just like also this ability to, and just like this desire to revisit work over the course of making it and producing it, and just trying to still find what makes sense most. And that happens often in a nonlinear way. And it happens often while thinking about just what the repercussions are of this film, of this statement. It's like one of the things that I would lay in bed thinking about is, what does it mean to make up or to relate to this story of reincarnation, which is from my tribe, which I don't know and I don't want to know, because the main source of material is from an anthropological text that was written 70, 80 years ago. And so like those are things that my tribe says shouldn't have been told and shared. And so me myself, I have misgivings about even just reading that. And so in some ways this is about me working through that history and who has access to it, and also how to present it, and how to even just cite authors in the credits with like Jasper Blowsnake and Paul Radin, who was the informant and who was also the anthropologist. So like, I mean, these sorts of like politics like go very deeply into how I'm thinking about what I'm filming and what I'm pointing the camera at and who I'm pointing the camera at, and how that can be either part of like my own personal archive, or just be expressed through me working through these different layers, and how the layers themselves like aren't necessarily only poetic, but they're also grounded in certain politics, or even just the relationship to a civic understanding of how I exist as an Indigenous person, who's Ho-Chunk, or who's an American, or who is someone with a camera pointing it at people or at the ocean.
That's really clarifying, because kind of one thing that I'm kind of drawing from both of your answers to this problem, to this question, I hadn't really thought about the idea of ethics as such, but it seems like this question of formalism or abstraction, or all of these things for both of you in some way are kind of circling back to an ethics of the image, right? That it could be that in a certain kind of political climate, Simon, you want to return to documentary images or something figurative for the purposes of having a lasting record of an oppressive moment. And Sky, the like you said, taking care of others' images in a non-exploitative way. That these formal decisions seem to have an ethical dimension. So. So I guess, yeah, that's kind of an underpinning that maybe I was picking up on in seeing a kind of simpatico element between your films, but I hadn't really kind of thought about it in those ways or articulated it. So, in maybe this kind of relates to that, but one of the folks who organized this kind of posed a question to me to kind of pose to you guys, and I guess this, like I said, this kind of relates. How has your practice changed inevitably in the last several months in response to COVID-19? You know, you're both filmmakers who, you know, engage with the outside world and are social image makers. How are you grappling with this as filmmakers?
Scott, I don't think your mic's on.
Maybe then you should go first.
Well, I don't know. I mean, it was strange for the first while. I don't know if you guys had this, you both had the same feeling, but like, just like during the first few weeks of lockdown, just like watching just like regular TV and seeing people like be close to each other and touch each other, it just felt like strange. And the fact that something that like we took for granted for so long, like, and so I think that applied to my own material. And in a way, just the idea of like, I know I will be separated from my where I'm from for like I guess a period of time now. And so I think I collected, like, I'm editing my first feature film at the moment. And so in some ways, I think it was like difficult to like confront the images because they are just like of where I'm from, and kind of like the idea of like reminding myself of that. But I think now I've kind of leaned into the idea of just like, of just using the time to like really reassess what I've been doing and to kind of work with things that I've been shelving for a long time. I think it's created a lot of space, but it's also, I mean, I think in a very practical way, I think it's just difficult sometimes to like work through things being so uncertain, you know, and like, so yeah, I feel like I'm just like trying to reconnect back to reassess things, but also reconnect back to like where I think I've come from in a lot of ways. That I feel like that's given me some kind of way forward, because I know that like there's a past to speak of to connect back to. I know like a pathway that I should continue to follow in a way.
Yeah, I think I think I'm still watching regular TV and probably stop.
Yeah, game shows. I've been watching game shows. British game shows specifically. So yeah.
Maybe I should give Wheel of Fortune another shot. I know. But yeah, I think also too, like having recently finished Motley, my first feature,
right.
I was just kind of exhausted as well. But then I think like with every project that usually happens like a few months after I finish and I'm really done with it, then I start getting antsy and want to make something new. And I think forced to be stationary for the last like 2 months has been good for me in a lot of ways, to just like pause and collect myself and to try and think through what am I doing next, and how these different projects that I was planning on shooting this summer are now on hold, and how that is actually can be an invitation to make something that's, I don't know, fits outside of like that plan, which may go back more into some of the things that I've been working through with like abstraction or text or language. Because actually in the last like week or so, I've really been wanting to make something, and to where, I don't know, the feature, there were less like visual manipulations and abstractions. I think with this next project, I want to just kind of revisit some of those formal elements just for the sake of it, and just to go around and shoot and see what it can do, especially as I drive around. And as soon I'll be leaving where I'm at in Bellingham, Washington.
Okay, great. We've got some questions from the web. So here we go. First of all, for Simon and Sky, how do you go about mapping your wildly evocative soundscapes?
I guess I'll go for, I've been working with a musician called Julia Blue for Signal 8 and my previous film E-Ticket. And so I've been working a lot with like very sample-based material, like little snippets of things that kind of working with like source material that like has like a lot of like I have a lot of attachments to, but trying to just like find a way to wring it out to make it to retain the original feeling that like feelings of association and associations that I have with that material without it being overly recognizable in a way. And I've been very into the idea of just like, what is the sound of an image? Not just the idea of like what the image, like the sound that should match an image. Like if you were just to film something and record it with a microphone, I feel like that's different. I feel like I'm pursuing the idea of like, what is the energy directly inside the image? Like, and how to like kind of reflect that in a way. In terms of movement or just in terms of just like how something might feel in a way. And so, yeah, I think basically I also try and work with like a lot of layers. I try and create something like a sound that's like very dense and then kind of combine several of those in a lot of ways. And so, yeah, it's kind of a process of, also something I often do with editing is that like, I'll take selects of like the footage I'm most interested in and just copy and paste it repeatedly, like for like 5 hours, and then just like kind of like layer sounds and repeatedly over that same material again and again in a kind of way that's spontaneous, and just sit there and watch it for a couple of hours. And so sometimes, like often, a lot of the sounds I feel like work best in the pieces. There are things that I kind of find in a way. So it's like essentially I'm kind of like auditioning different sounds and different possibilities with the same images over and over again. And I think often like I have an idea of what might work or something, and just the act of like doing something, letting chance be my guide in a way, and like and pulling that thread is something I'm very interested in working with sound.
Right. And then Sky, I mean, your soundscapes, your soundtracks often include original text as well. So I mean, I guess that's a complicating factor, but also enriching one. So,
yeah, I think I have a process similar to Simon's, and just working through material and just like trying to figure out what is the best for the piece, or the most evocative or most reflective of how I'm feeling about the image or the contents. I mean, with with Jaji A products, it's primarily driven by recordings that I made on like a old tape recorder with my dad, and so like that has a very like unique quality and timbre to the sounds and to the voice, and I think there's just like trying to reflect that throughout the piece, or have that be complementary to it. And with something like When You're Lost in the Rain, it has these different elements that's, I think, like in some ways are trying to like pinpoint to these different, I guess, like maps or map making process of these different perspectives around these different movements of identity that are presented in the film, whether it's through Jordan or through the Whitman poem or through my dad singing the song. And even with something like Lord, the thing that I really thought about with just reading and me being the reader of the texts and writing the text was like, I hadn't really done anything like that before. And this was kind of like in preparation for Mothni the Feature. And so this is just like something I wanted to do to see like how well I can read, and also just like thinking again about the sound of language, like thinking about how there is a musical quality to language and the way that people speak and intonation. And even just like using the density and the opacity of the text, just allow the sound of the text to be heard in a lot of ways and have a musical sort of element to it. I mean, along with the music and along with just peppering throughout these hints of the performance that is at the end, and just trying to weave these different elements together, whether there are visual signifiers or whether they're things that I'm hoping can exist on their own in orbit around the idea of the piece.
Cool. Okay, next question, this one from YouTube. Can you talk a bit about the revisiting of work from earlier in your careers? Both of you screened re-edited versions of films in this program.
Yeah, so Highview was actually initially a 20-minute long 4-projector 16mm work. And so I made a 4K documentation of the 60mm multiple projection. And I don't know, I feel like just to watch something on a computer that lends itself to being something that's live, I wanted to make something that was just like tighter and better for the internet, essentially, to be honest with you. But also I think, I don't know, I think yeah, I'm kind of surprised at kind of gestures that I think I was pointing towards that kind of show through in later work, and like things that like weren't necessarily like a big deal for like weren't necessarily like focus points earlier now seem like they're like very part of very like to the forefront of what I'm doing in a lot of ways.
Wait, did I screen a re-edited version of anything?
Yeah, I wasn't sure about that. I thought they were all original edits from you. So, have you gone back and re-edited any of your films that were had already debuted at any point?
Yeah, I mean, like one thing I do like to do is just like screen works in progress and just like show it to an audience, and then I don't know, just like see how it feels to, as me myself watching it in a room full of people, and like what do I cringe at, you know, and like and it's just like what are the things I'm trying to lie to myself about that, you know, are very much apparent to a room full of people, or even just hoping that people don't notice these things that I'm trying to get away with. So I don't know, I feel like I try to revisit work, but also I think when I try to be done with it, I try to be really done with it, you know? I think I might have shown an earlier version of Lore, or I might have shown an earlier version of When You're Lost in the Rain. And also too, like When You're Lost in the Rain actually exists as a 45 and as a sound piece. And that has a different edit to it, where there's another element that's introduced into the soundtrack. It's actually me with my Ho-Chunk language teacher, and I think just reordering a few things. And so like that was fun to do in itself, because it's just offering different approaches to the same material, like one that is primarily visual, the other that's primarily auditory, and seeing how they can exist separately from one another. And I think even like what I like about this program itself and revisiting these older works is that, I don't know, I guess it doesn't feel that old. Feels not too long ago. But yeah, it's nice to see these threads or these through lines that, you know, I may have begun working within Jaji Aprox and just kind of like push further in terms of like what I feel comfortable with or what I feel is interesting and exciting, and seeing how those sorts of things are either returns or departures, and also when I need to get some new plays in the playbook, you
know. I think this question probably relates to our uniquely online confab here. Quote, in an ideal world, how would you want these films to be shown? So imagine an ideal world. No famine, no Trump. Just, you know, how would you want them to be shown? No, it's a good question. I mean, I think it probably has to do with medium specificity and things like that. So how would you like your films to be received?
I'm always into cinemas, to be honest, you know? I mean, it's just, there's something about the big screen in the dark room and like sitting next to people and some good speakers.
Yeah.
But I mean, actually, even too with Lore, I had a print installed at the Minneapolis Institute of Art, and it was like March 17th or something, or 18th, or it was like the week right before everything just locked down. And I just got to go to the opening night and see it installed and see it projected, you know, on 16 in a space, and like it closed the next day, and it's still closed. But that was really cool because I'd never seen a print before of something that I've made.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've put all my works on Vimeo now, and I think what's important for me is that people just feel comfortable when they're watching my films. I always kind of want people to just be in and like also just accept the idea of just like accepting whatever is behind you for what it is. But it's interesting, the idea of like kind of what Sky was just talking about, like, you know, I was making these like a kind of elaborate projection performances before that could never be repeated. They were always different every time I screened them. Right. And I kind of moved away from making those works for the past couple of years, and just like now, just like it feels like I really want to go back because this is like physical and like something that like feels. I mean, it's like something that feels more like something I have greater urgency of just like making things that like are fleeting in a way. And that's kind of what I was like, that was really annoying me before, because I was making work that like couldn't really be shown like repeatedly in a theater without me lugging like 4 30-pound projectors across the state or something like that.
Right.
But now I want it again now, you know, which is like, maybe that's what I've come away with here in my process in a lot of ways. But yeah, I'm just like looking, like I just imagining the day of like going into a movie theater, like what's that gonna feel like again? You know, it's kind of a strange thing.
Right. I mean, just as a side note, I was assigned to write about this all online film festival recently, which was not originally an all online. It was the Visions du Réel Film Festival in Sweden, and they put all of their content online. And you know, one of the things that you inevitably kind of find is that it just kind of emphasizes this problem that we've been kind of dealing with for a long time, that access, which, you know, we all want more people to have access, versus the fact that things on the web kind of become objects swimming in this sea of content, and they kind of it becomes harder to find them. It becomes harder to kind of isolate them. It becomes harder for things to find their audience. And so, yeah, that's kind of the dialectic that we're, you know, stuck in. So yeah, it'll be good to get back in the theaters one of these days. So next question, for Sky, the colors and imagery in I'll Remember You are so otherworldly. How did you create this look?
With well, I guess with the opening, what I did was I took 3 copies of the same clip and layered them. And then in one, I think like I did like some sort of blur. The other I had, I think like I did like a negative effect. And the other, I think I just oversaturated like the base clip in terms of the color. And there's like, I mean, you can also like move the direction of the blur, so it's like vertical or horizontal, and I did vertical. And yeah, just like overlaid them and like just went through these different filters of how they're overlaying on top of each other and trying to like, you know, tweak like the levels and the controls, and just trying to find something that was a balance between legible in terms of like the shape of the dancers and their outfits, versus illegible in terms of like identifying markers, and then also just seeing how it played throughout the clip. And even like with like the I don't know, it's like I think of it as a dark film. I mean, just like visually dark, and a lot of it had to do with just like where I was at shooting that lighthouse, and just it had like that, like the color of the light was really striking, and just like how where it was in the forest and by the ocean, and just trying to find different elements that I had in my archive that fit with these different pieces, whether it's like Diane Burns' performance and that giant cross that's orange that I was driving, I think through South Dakota or North Dakota, somewhere in the Great Plains, and it's just this big cross on the side of the road, and I pulled off and just shot it and just kind of like turned the shutter speed way down and just kind of did circles with it and had no idea what I was going to do with it until like maybe like a year later when I don't know, it found its way into this piece, just because it matched visually in terms of like the tone, or just something that felt really in line with the language I was trying to use in terms of the color expression through that. And also having recently just like thought about like, or like really getting into like color field paintings and Helen Frankenthaler, and thinking about how these different, like what's the symbology, or just like what is the relationship to color between these different moves and abstraction, and just, yeah. And so I think that's how I did that with buttons and levers and sliders.
There's another question from online. I guess this is directed at me. How did you select these specific films to show together? Did their interaction surprise any of you? I kind of addressed this at the top of the hour, but you know, I went through and watched everything I could get my hands on by these fellows, and I also asked them for their own suggestions, and we kind of collectively came to a final list. I mean, I think that the thing that, well, I don't know that I was surprised. I was impressed by the solidity of both of their bodies of work and the cohesion. But I mean, I think that, like I said before, I was pleasantly surprised by my hunch that there were significant formal and emotional resonances between their works, you know, proved to be correct. That I, you know, it wasn't a fool's errand. That this has turned out like a to be a pretty decent idea. So I guess that's all I have to say about that. Let's see. Another question. Sky, I was curious about your comment re opacity of language. Can you talk more about your use of the phonetic alphabet in Jaji? And perhaps the question of opacity relates to the use of transparency in your work, Simon, and more broadly to the question about access in this moment.
Yeah, like with the IPA, International Phonetic Alphabet, and Joji APROX. Yeah, like the main formal design of that film was like, it begins with the IPA and then it tapers off to eventual no use in terms of just like how something is seemingly scientific and then becoming more personal. That's sort of a tapering or trajectory. And I mean, like the IPA is something that's also used by linguists to help indigenous communities create orthographies, writing systems for their languages. So it's just, I mean, it's not uncommon for tribal language divisions to be working with linguists in terms of developing that. And so like that's where my introduction to the IPA came from, was with my work with language revitalization. And including in the film, it was just like a way to, begin this sort of, and establish this sort of distance between me, the filmmaker, and my father, the subject, and create something that's like cold at the same time intimate, because, and I'm recording him and talking to him, and like, what am I doing in terms of that documentation? And I mean, like in terms of like opacity as well as language, I mean, it has a lot to do with like the glissant sort of like definition of that, and like what it means to make something for an audience that is doesn't need context, or for who it is not opaque. And I feel like that drives a lot of my work, or just like that sentiment where initially, I mean, and still, just I think about my audience as being very specific and focused. And that's like who I'm speaking to, where there is opacity, but also there is no opacity, And even with something like the IPA, like some people think that, that's like a native language, and it's like, it's English. And there's a certain relationship to that as well, in terms of even just like, who knows what the IPA is, and who cares, and who's it important to, and how can this tool that, is trying to rework or unwork some of the effects of colonization in terms of language loss and language oppression, and even just, what are all those underpinnings, and what are all that subtext beneath just, my dad talking about powwows,
Yeah. Well, that actually, we have time for one more question, and maybe that kind of leads into something that I was kind of trying to figure out how to ask. I mean, you're both artists of color, and the experimental film world is becoming more diverse, but it's certainly not as diverse as it could be. And I guess one question that I had maybe for both of you is, your work addresses multiple and many different audiences. And I guess one thing I would be interested to know is if you found that there are significantly different responses, say, when you show your work to friends who are more likely to get some of the specific Hong Kong references, or the First Peoples references that a lot of us white folks in the avant-garde are not necessarily going to get. And how does that kind of multiple coding in the works kind of affect your thinking as creators?
It's a big question. I mean, I think the two most recent films I've made, they don't like directly depict the protests and things that are happening, but they're kind of like surrounded by that energy, and are showing a lot of spaces that are kind of synonymous with the events that have unfolded. And so I don't know. I keep thinking about the idea of like, if you show an image of something, do you have to explain what it is? Do you like, is it enough to like allow something to be a presence in of itself? And are you undermining your own expression of it by trying to like to show it or like have it be presented in a way for people to understand? And I feel like in some ways I'm like, oh, like there's this balance between like how far you go with your own expression of something versus pulling back and trying to make it more digestible for someone or make it make sense or something. And I keep the thing I keep coming back to is this idea that like I feel like I'm hindering my own ideas and kind of my own self and my own place of origin and the things expressed within it by trying to circumvent that direct expression by making it something that like is universal in a way.
Right. And I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but I just want to clarify that, you know, as a critic, I'm most interested in the fact that there are certain things about works that I'm just not going to know, that I'm not qualified to know, that I'm not. I think there's a history.
And it's okay not to know. You know, I think it's more interesting.
Absolutely, there's a history in criticism for the critic to assume that he or she is every work's ideal reader, and I think that's absolutely wrong. And so I'm always kind of interested in what is it in works that is not for me, and is not supposed to be for me. I'm interested in what I'm not qualified to see. Totally. Because I want to be othered, right? I want to encounter works that are not trying to talk to me and that give me something to grapple with in that sense. So I hope that kind of it maybe explains where my question was coming from.
Oh no, I totally feel where your question is coming from. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I often like think about, you know, the burden of representation, how it's put on usually like the maker to explain work to an audience for whom it isn't intended. And then it's fortifying in some ways to just kind of lean back on the remembering that, you know, I'm a filmmaker, not an interpreter, you know, and like I'm not the person whose responsibility it is to translate what these things mean to an audience outside of the one that's intended. But also that being said, I am always happy to have conversations about the work, like in Q&As or, you know, in a bar or on Zoom now, you know, just like to work through and have dialogue about what these things mean or what they don't mean, and having some sense of agency. And like, I don't need to talk about everything. I can say, no, I don't want to answer this question or that question in terms of identifying what the references are. And it's, you know, it's like one of those things with an audience. It's just like, if they know, they know. If they don't know, then they don't know. But that doesn't mean they can't watch. And it doesn't mean that I'm not trying to communicate with them as well, via like the abstractions or via these things that, I don't know, are more sensorially representative of a stance and an idea rather than an overt statement that is in English or Chinook or whatever.
Right. And I think, that makes perfect sense. And in a way, it seems like that also ties in just the question of experimental film itself, that if people want to be spoon-fed knowledge, there are all kinds of other places in media to get that, that experience of always being the target, I suppose. So, yeah. Well, this has been a fantastic conversation. I want to thank you both very much for participating. Sky Hopinka and Simon Liu, thank you. And just a reminder to those watching, the series of films will be online for the remainder of the week. So if you haven't had the chance to see them, or if you want to just watch them again, they're available for you. And I'm going to turn it over to Michael Robinson from Cinema Arts Society. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael. Thank you so much, Sky and Simon, for joining us for this conversation. We really appreciated the works that you shared and just the thoughtful responses that you gave. And Michael, thank you so much for curating such an amazing program and really putting in so much thought into these questions. If you're interested in these works, again, they're able to stream all the way through Saturday. If you did not get the link, let me know, email me directly. And if you want to know any more about these filmmakers, we'll be happy to send you their websites. It's available on our Facebook page. And I believe that both filmmakers have works also that were not in the program that are available to screen as well on their website. So coming up for Cinema Arts, we have an Instagram Live with filmmaker Vicky White and novelist Catherine Center at 5 p.m. tomorrow. They'll talk about their film, The Lost Husband, which distributed during the pandemic, and what an experience that was. We will also be streaming The Infiltrators. It's available to rent as of Friday, and that will be available to rent for a week. That will be in co-presentation with the Houston Latino Film Festival. That was the toast of Sundance. Really amazing film. And we will have a special Q&A live stream that Wednesday, May 20th, with co-directors Alex Rivera and Christina Barra, as well as human rights activist Antonio Ariano. And that will also be on our YouTube channel. That's at 7 p.m. Wednesday, May 20th. That is the same exact time that PSA is hosting their music videos by Derek Jarman. So not saying that you have to pick your favorite organization, but unless you have two computer screens, you might have to choose. Our Q&A will be available on our YouTube page though, so it will be readily accessible afterwards if you wanna tune into to PSAs first. Again, thank you everyone so much for joining. This has been fantastic. Thank you so much PSA for Daniel and Tony. This was a fantastic program and we look forward to working with y'all in the future.